The silence in the house was a luxury I had earned, a deep, thick quiet that only descends upon the affluent, meticulously organized life of a high-level corporate executive's wife. But on that Tuesday afternoon, it felt less like peace and more like a vacuum, sucking the air from my lungs and the certainty from my mind. I am Eleanor, 52 years old, and 5 years into a relationship with Julian, a man I genuinely believed was my safe harbor after a shipwreck of a first marriage. Julian is 51, a man who lives by the minute, his days segmented, color-coded, and executed with the ruthless efficiency of an HR director at the top of the corporate food chain. A man for whom time is literally money, and whose schedule is a holy text I had, by necessity, come to memorize. The first tremor of doubt, the faintest, most unsettling rumble, had occurred a year prior. It was a package, delivered one crisp autumn morning. Julian opened it with the casual disinterest he reserves for junk mail or overly optimistic internal reports. Inside was a book, something vague about organizational culture, the kind of corporate gospel that sells 1,000 copies and is read by precisely none, and a small, heavy thank you card. I remember standing there, near the granite countertop, the low light catching the gold embossing on the card. He lifted it out, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, a reaction too quick, too contained. "Oh, that was nice of her," he'd said, his voice flat, immediately setting the package aside. Her. The name R was a mere initial on the card's signature line, yet it hung in the air like a drop of poison, perfectly still and utterly toxic. I asked, simply, "Who is R?" He paused, a tiny, almost imperceptible hesitation before he answered. It was the pause of a man checking his internal notes, ensuring the narrative was consistent. "A work colleague," he finally said. "Someone he had been helping. A mentee." A mentee. I had heard the term before, of course, usually applied to 2 or 3 young men he met with regularly online, discussing career trajectories and performance reviews. Those meetings were open plans, so to speak. I would hear snippets of their calls, dry, technical, entirely professional, the soundtrack to my afternoon tea. But R, the initial R, was a new note in the symphony of Julian's life, a rogue chord. I noted it as odd, the simple fact that he had never mentioned her before. He talks about his work, not in a gossipy way, Julian is far too discreet for that, but he talks about the people, the rising stars, the management challenges, the ones he is guiding. Yet R, the one nice enough to send him a physical gift, complete with a thank you card and an overly academic book, had been invisible until that moment. I didn't dwell on it. That is the first defense mechanism of the woman who has known betrayal. You train yourself to dismiss the small things, to call it anxiety, to label the gut feeling a phantom limb of past trauma. Betrayal trauma, I call it. It's like an inner alarm that's been falsely triggered so many times that when a real fire starts, you assume it's just a faulty sensor and reach to switch it off. Some time passed, a few weeks perhaps, a month, and the book incident had faded into the background static of our marriage. Then, I overheard his video call with her. It wasn't a work day for me. Julian was working from his home office, a fortress of glass and walnut wood down the hall. The door was slightly ajar, which was unusual for his scheduled calls, but a small mercy for me. I was passing by, intending to get a glass of water, when I heard him laugh. It wasn't the polite, measured chuckle he gave to his colleagues. It was genuine, open, a little vibrant. I froze by the archway, the polished floor cold beneath my feet. They weren't discussing quarterly reports or personnel issues. They were discussing the book she had sent, and apparently he had sent her one back. The words drifted out, light and intellectual. Sapiens. a dense anthropological tome about human history and sociology. I remember Julian saying, No, you're missing the point of Harari's critique of the agricultural revolution. It's not about abundance, it's about the illusion of progress, the golden cage. His voice was animated, his tone authoritative, yet seeking approval, trying to impress her with the depth of his reading and the acuity of his intellect. She responded with a lightness and a quick intelligence that seemed to genuinely delight him. They spoke of ideas, their thoughts, their philosophical takeaways from the books, the kind of conversation you have when you are trying to forge a connection that transcends the mundane. It was a kind of intellectual flirting, entirely devoid of sexual suggestion, but heavy with a different kind of intimacy. The intimacy of shared worldviews, the intimacy of mutual admiration. It felt more like a first date than a mentorship. I retreated, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I had only heard that one conversation, and I would never hear another, but it was enough. The atmosphere was charged. Later that evening, after the day's work was done and we were sitting over glasses of Chilean Cabernet, I brought it up, casual and easy. I heard you talking to R today, the one who sent the book, the Sapiens guy. That's heavy reading for a mentee. Julian didn't flinch. He picked up his glass, swirled the dark liquid, and took a slow sip. Ah, Serafina, he corrected me, pronouncing the full name. Another new piece of information. Yes, she's bright. I sent her a used copy of Sapiens because she was thoughtful enough to send me that cultural analysis book. It's HR, Eleanor. You exchange intellectual currency. It's a courtesy. He paused, a charming, easy smile playing on his lips, the kind that had convinced me he was different from my first husband. Besides, he added, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper, you have absolutely nothing to worry about there. She's in a committed lesbian relationship. You know how the corporate world is. You hear the term partner, and you make assumptions. Committed lesbian relationship. It was the perfect, airtight defense. A joke, a reassurance, and a subtle redirection all in one. It validated my own suspicion that he felt the need to explain the nature of their relationship while simultaneously offering an irrefutable, logical reason for calm. He couldn't be cheating with a woman who was committed to another woman. It was clever. It was flawless. I let it go. I believed him. Or rather, I chose to believe him. The phantom limb of my anxiety quieted down. That was a year ago. 7 months ago, Julian had made a significant career shift, leaving the massive, sprawling corporation where he had worked for years, the one where Serafina still worked. He had taken a C-suite role at a smaller, more boutique firm, a move he described as a strategic pivot towards true influence. I had assumed, logically, that the mentorships had ended. You leave the company, you close the chapter on its internal personnel. You don't take your mentees with you. He had certainly stopped the online meetings with the 2 men he used to mentor. The digital trail had gone cold. I had forgotten about Serafina entirely. Then, last week, over a rushed breakfast of cold brew and avocado toast, the past came back with the chilling clarity of a crime scene photograph. He was scrolling through his phone, a frown of concentration on his face. I reached out to Serafina this week, he murmured, half to himself, half to me, to see if she'd be interested in the new VP of talent position my boss and I are hiring for. I stopped chewing. Serafina? Yes, R. He looked up, his expression innocent. She's already been promoted internally, which is a shame. Would have been a great fit. A small, insignificant comment, yet it detonated a bomb in the quiet confines of my mind. "Wait," I said, trying to keep my voice light, casual, masking the earthquake happening beneath the surface. You're still in touch with her?" He gave a small, dismissive shrug. "Oh yeah, we still meet monthly. We try to keep the connection going. Good for both of us." Monthly. The word echoed, hollow and accusatory. Monthly video chats for at least a year and a half. The connection Julian had ended with his male mentees the moment he stepped out the door, he had quietly, meticulously maintained with her. I had just found out about it because he had used her as a casual example of a potential hire. The air shifted, thick with the unsaid. I didn't want to accuse him, not yet. I needed data. I tried the light-hearted approach, the subtle poke. "You know, darling," I said, letting a smile soften the edge, "you would have thought it was profoundly strange, suspicious even, if I had been exchanging books and having monthly private calls with a male colleague who didn't work at the same company as me anymore." He looked straight at me, his blue eyes unwavering, entirely relaxed, not defensive, not nervous. The absolute picture of a man with nothing to hide. "Yeah, I probably would have been curious about it," he conceded, magnanimous. "I'm not a robot, Eleanor, but I wouldn't have been suspicious, not once I understood the context. It's an intellectual mentorship, nothing more." And then I made the joke. The one he had given me a year ago. A joke that was now a loaded weapon. "Well, lucky for you, she's in a committed lesbian relationship," I quipped, watching his face. The confidence, the relaxation, it faltered. A brief, almost imperceptible hesitation, like a skip in a vinyl record. "Actually," he said, his voice dropping slightly, the tone shifting from relaxed husband to analytical HR director, "I realize her partner is a man. I just assumed it was a woman because she used the word partner. I mentioned something about her partner being a woman and she corrected me. She wasn't offended though, thought it was funny, actually." The shift from irrefutably safe to entirely accessible was a cold shock. Julian had either lied a year ago, or he had been wrong and failed to correct the record until that very moment. A deliberate omission, a cover story that had now expired. He must have seen the slight tension around my eyes, the way my jaw tightened. He reached across the table and placed his hand over mine, his touch warm, reassuring. "Eleanor, my love," he said, his voice laced with patronizing tenderness, "you have nothing to worry about, absolutely nothing. She's a baby. She's like 30 years old. She's like 30 years old." The phrase echoed in the deep recesses of my mind, a chilling pronouncement. It wasn't a reassurance, it was a categorization. It was an intellectual firewall. I couldn't possibly be interested in her because of the 21-year age gap. She is an object of mentorship, not an object of desire. But the corporate world is full of older men who prey on younger, ambitious women, and Julian knew that better than anyone. His dismissal was too quick, too neat. It felt like a preemptive strike against an unvoiced accusation. It seems strange to me, more than strange. It is a cluster of anomalies that, taken individually, are nothing, but stacked together, they form a clear, undeniable picture of obfuscation. He's been meeting with her every month. It's been at least a year and a half of consistent, private, one-on-one video chats. He never mentions her. I only found out about the initial connection because she sent him a book. I only found out about the ongoing connection because he was trying to poach her for his new firm. He has continued these meetings despite leaving the company, a departure that immediately terminated his relationships with his other mentees. Julian's schedule, I know it. He is one of the busiest men I have ever known. His calendar is a mosaic of back-to-back meetings, international calls, strategy sessions, and travel. To maintain a private, monthly meeting with a former mentee who is no longer relevant to his current firm's operational structure, that is a calculated, deliberate expense of his most valuable resource, his time. He has continued to make time for her. And here is the most chilling detail, the one that truly unravels my composure. I have never heard him meeting with her on his work-from-home days. Since Serafina, R, is not part of his current company, their mentorship calls would not be scheduled during his professional, internal working hours. That would be a misappropriation of company time, a lapse Julian, the meticulous HR director, would never commit. So the calls must be happening outside the official window. When? His mornings are blocked with international calls to London and Asia. His evenings are almost always spent with me, or entertaining clients, or in the focused, quiet work he brings home. His lunch break? Maybe. But Julian eats at his desk, head buried in a report. 5 minutes of focused refueling before the next meeting. I have spent the last 3 days replaying every single quiet hour we've shared over the last year. Where has he been? When are these video chats taking place? They can't be happening at the office. He leaves his laptop there, and the calls are supposedly a monthly routine, not a spontaneous encounter. If they were happening during his WFH day, even if he closed his office door, I would hear the low murmur of his voice, the quick, vibrant laugh I heard that one time. But there is silence. Absolute silence. When we spoke about it, Julian seemed totally relaxed. He was not defensive, not nervous, merely stating facts. This is the first I've heard of her in a year, I thought. The realization settling like a blanket of ice. And he only told me now because he needed to mention the hiring attempt. The psychological struggle is profound. I don't work in the corporate world. My knowledge of mentorship is limited to online articles and abstract concepts. But even by those standards, the situation is irregular, maybe even improper. To carry forward only the single female mentee after leaving the company, to conduct these monthly sessions in secret, never speaking of her, while he freely discusses his other colleagues and his professional relationships, it's not just concerning, it feels engineered. I am a woman with betrayal trauma. My intuition is a weapon that has misfired so many times that I don't trust the feel of the trigger. It is hard for me to know what is genuine threat assessment and what is simply my anxiety, the ghost of my ex-husband's lies rising up to haunt me. But the details are too sharp, too precise to be mere anxiety. The lie about the partner, the calculated use of the age difference, the secret monthly meetings, the disappearing time slots. I walked to Julian's office door, the walnut grain cool and unyielding under my fingertips. I didn't open it. I just stood there, listening to the rhythmic clicking of his keyboard, the sound of a man immersed in a completely legitimate, professional world. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the facade of normalcy was paper-thin. The corporate world Julian operates in is a labyrinth of power, ambition, and quiet deception. His job as an HR director means he is, by definition, an expert in human behavior, in reading cues, in manipulation, and in covering tracks. He's a master of compartmentalization. And I, his wife, who loves him and wants to believe him, am perfectly positioned to be the target of his expertise. I needed external validation. I needed a mirror to hold up to the situation to confirm that my unease was not merely a psychological scar flaring up to haunt me. I called my best friend, Clara, who knows my past, who knows Julian's reputation, who lives and breathes the pragmatic reality of a working professional.
Clara, I need you to reality test me, I said, my voice low and tight. I think Julian is having an emotional affair, or worse. Maybe I'm just crazy, but listen to this. I laid out the details, the book, the intense intellectual connection, the termination of the other mentorships, the ongoing secret monthly meetings, the lie about the partner, the age comment. I watched the clock tick on my kitchen wall as I spoke, the silence punctuated only by Clara's sharp intake of breath. "Eleanor," she finally said, her voice grave, "you are not crazy. That is textbook boundary violation. He is spending non-work-related time consistently, privately with a younger woman who no longer even works at his company, and he actively concealed it from you for a year. That's not mentorship. That's a secret life." "But the calls, they have to be happening somewhere," I whispered, staring out the window at the perfectly manicured lawn. "I work from home. I am here all the time. I never hear them." "Then they're not calls, Eleanor." Clara's voice was suddenly hard, professional, cutting through my denial. "Or they're happening when you're out, or they're happening in a place you can't hear, or they're not calls at all." "What do you mean they're not calls? They live in another state. They've never met in person," I retorted, citing Julian's own defense.
"That's what he told you," Clara said simply. "When did he tell you they hadn't met in person? A year ago? People travel, Eleanor. HR directors travel constantly. Do you check his itineraries? Do you know what his business trip to Chicago last month truly entailed?" The idea hit me like a physical blow. The trips. The carefully documented, legitimate business trips Julian took every few weeks. He would often spend an extra day, citing the need to touch base with the regional teams or host a critical dinner for new hires. I had never questioned it. Why would I? It was Julian. I hung up with Clara, a chilling, resolute energy replacing the anxiety. My intuition wasn't a faulty sensor. It was the smoke alarm, and the fire was burning brightly, quietly, in the carefully curated shadows of Julian's life. I had to find out when these meetings were happening. I had to crack the schedule. Julian was meticulous. He logged everything. But he didn't use a physical diary. He used a shared digital calendar, the ultimate testament to our transparency. But he also used a private, password-protected app on his phone for personal notes. A small, green icon he would never leave open around me. I started a systematic observation. I tracked his movements. I watched his phone.
The next morning, I observed a small, almost insignificant change in his routine. He usually leaves his phone on the charger for a good 15 minutes after waking up, while he makes his espresso. That morning, he took it with him, tucked into the pocket of his bespoke silk robe. He didn't check it once, but he kept it close. A small, cold pebble of suspicion lodged itself in my throat. He was guarding something. The HR director, the master of corporate honesty and ethical conduct, was constructing a perfect invisible cage of lies, and I was trapped inside it with him. The game had changed from, am I crazy, to how does he do it? The psychological thriller had begun. I was not just a wife anymore. I was an investigator, searching for the ghost of Serafina in the quiet corners of my own home, desperate to unmask Julian before his carefully constructed life, and mine, came crashing down. And I knew with every fiber of my being that the age difference, the lesbian joke, the book exchange were all just stage props. They were the distractions in a perfectly choreographed dance of betrayal. I just needed to find the music. The shift from worried wife to meticulous investigator was less a transition and more a terrifying freefall. My anxiety, that ever-present phantom of my first marriage, had finally merged with reality, transforming into cold, hard logic. I was chasing a ghost named Serafina through the fortress of Julian's meticulously crafted schedule, and the most frightening thing was that she left no digital footprints I could find. I started with this schedule. The shared digital calendar was a masterpiece of corporate transparency. Our appointments, his major meetings, our social engagements, all color-coded in soothing pastels. If Julian were meeting with a mentee, especially one he insisted was purely professional, the entry should be there. Mentorship call, R. But there was nothing. Not a single entry marked for Serafina or R, or even private call. The 12 monthly appointments he had been maintaining for a year and a half were entirely invisible. I spent hours cross-referencing. I looked for 30-minute gaps, the telltale buffer zones busy executives create. I looked for repeating blank slots, like a weekly recurrent appointment that was deliberately left generic. Nothing. His schedule was an unbroken chain of high-level activity. Every minute was accounted for his current legitimate work. This presented a profound technical mystery. If these were standard video calls, Skype, Zoom, Teams, they required a clear time slot, they required sound, and they required bandwidth. He's extremely busy and practically has to schedule his time to the minute. I became obsessed with the concept of his lunch break. Julian, in his dedication to corporate asceticism, barely took one. He'd consume a protein bar or a small salad while conducting a low-priority internal review, headset glued to his ear, eyes fixed on the screen. I watched him now, a hawk over a mouse, during his supposed lunch window. He was always on a call, a supplier, a regional HR manager, an internal team briefing. The conversations were always dry, procedural, and entirely professional. No intellectual spark, no vibrant laughter, no heavy discussion of sapiens. The lunch break was a myth, a red herring. So when, if not during work and not during our evenings, which are almost sacredly protected for us, then where was he finding this monthly hour? He has continued these meetings despite leaving the company and has not continued to meet with the other mentees he had there. The anomaly of Serafina grew sharper, more painful.
I started examining his phone use in greater detail. Julian is a man of habits. He charges his phone overnight in the master bathroom. I began checking the battery usage reports, looking for unusual spikes in activity or data consumption during non-traditional hours. Nothing obvious. Everything was rational, clean. He was a digital ghost, leaving no tracks. Except for one private space. The small, green, password-protected Notes app he used for what he called deep thinking and journaling. A place he insisted was a mental scratch pad, but I knew was the ultimate vault of his private thoughts. Gaining access was impossible without his biometrics or his 4-digit security code, which he changed with military regularity. The frustration was a physical weight pressing down on my chest. I felt the hot,
ugly surge of the betrayal trauma rising. Don't be the crazy wife, Eleanor. Don't let the past dictate the present. But the facts were screaming at me. Only one mentee, a concealed relationship, a manufactured lie about her partner, and now a time slot that didn't exist. I needed to break out of the house, out of my own head. I needed external confirmation, a third-party witness to the anomaly of Serafina. I remembered Marcus Thorne. Marcus was Julian's former second-in-command at the old corporation, a man Julian had ostensibly mentored and promoted before leaving. I found his LinkedIn profile and crafted a message that read like polite, spouse-driven networking. Dear Marcus, Julian speaks highly of your progress. I'm considering some consulting work and wanted your expert perspective on the current corporate climate. Could we grab a coffee? Eleanor. Marcus agreed, scheduling a meeting at a sterile, upscale coffee bar near the financial district. The meeting was a tightrope walk. I had to appear interested in my fictional consulting career while subtly steering the conversation towards Julian's HR practices at the old firm. Julian was always so dedicated to developing talent, I said, stirring my artisanal latte, keeping my eyes wide and innocent. I remember him talking about a few high-potential individuals he was working with before he left. The two young men, they've done so well, haven't they? Marcus nodded, taking a professional sip of his espresso. Julian is a machine for talent development, the best. But frankly, he dropped them cold the minute he had his resignation accepted. No hard feelings, that's corporate life. Yes, that's what I thought. I mused, deliberately letting my gaze wander. So, no one at all? I remember him mentioning a young woman. R, I think her name was. Very smart, into culture, sapiens, that sort of thing. Marcus hesitated. It was the same tiny, crucial hesitation Julian had displayed a year ago, a momentary calculation. Ah, Serafina Vance, he said, finally. He smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. Yes, Serafina was different. Julian didn't drop her. No. In fact, he was uncharacteristically hands-on with Serafina. She was his golden child. Golden child? I prompted, keeping my voice soft, encouraging.
High potential doesn't cover it. She was fast-tracked. Julian moved mountains for her. Her promotion, the one he mentioned she just got, it happened so quickly it raised a few internal eyebrows. People started speculating. Not because she wasn't talented, she absolutely is, but because Julian was so protective of her. Any critique, any obstacle, he dealt with it personally. It was unusual. He never did that for the other mentees. Unusual how? The blood was beginning to pound in my ears, but I forced my tone to remain level. Unusual dedication. I remember asking him about it once. Why Serafina? Why the intense focus when he had so many other talented people? And Julian, he gave me this cryptic answer. He said, Marcus, some people are projects. Serafina is a legacy. A legacy. Not a mentee. A legacy. A permanent fixture Julian wanted to embed in the world. A reflection of his own intellectual ambition. The conversation was not just about career paths. It was about shaping her, controlling her trajectory, and ensuring her continued presence in his life. Julian had always been obsessed with control. I thanked Marcus, my mind reeling. The picture was now clearer, sharper. Julian's connection to Serafina was a deliberate, powerful commitment, not a casual professional courtesy. It was a relationship he valued far beyond his professional duties, one he had gone out of his way to sustain, even using his corporate influence to accelerate her career.
a fact he had never mentioned. That night, alone in the vast, silent house, the specter of my first betrayal rose up with sickening clarity. I remembered the exact moment I knew. Not the finding of the text messages, but the 5 minutes before. I was walking into the office of my first husband, Richard, on a Tuesday afternoon. The door was ajar. I heard a laugh. A sound just like Julian's vibrant laugh, open and slightly reckless. I saw her. A young woman, also a mentee, sitting on the corner of his desk, her hair shining under the fluorescent lights. Richard had his back to me, but the way his shoulders were slumped, the way he was leaning into her space, the absolute, unguarded intimacy of the posture, I knew then. It wasn't the physical act that killed me. It was the moment I realized I had been erased, replaced by an intimate, shared world he kept hidden. The memory was a hot wire against my skin, driving me forward. I wasn't going to wait for the text messages this time. I was going to intercept the lie before it manifested in physical evidence. Julian was due to fly to San Francisco the following week for what he termed a critical management summit and a day of regional head review. 3 days. Plenty of time for a business trip. Plenty of time for a lie. She lives in another state, so they've never met in person. This was Julian's core, simple defense. It relied on distance and the safety of the screen. I had to test that defense.
The night before his trip, Julian was in the dining room reviewing thick, glossy binders for the summit. He had left his briefcase, a luxurious, dark leather satchel that contained his professional universe, unzipped on the floor by his chair. It was a breach of his usual obsessive organization, a gift from the universe, or perhaps a deliberate act of carelessness. I waited until he went upstairs to take a final call. The house fell silent again, that heavy, oppressive quiet. I approached the briefcase. My hands were shaking, and the fear of what I might find wrestled violently with the shame of invading his privacy. But shame was a luxury I couldn't afford. Betrayal was lethal. I slipped my hand inside. I ignored the binders and the expense reports. I felt around the interior lining. Julian, I knew, used every compartment. My fingers brushed against something stiff, tucked into the shallow, zipped pocket of the inner lining. It wasn't paper, it was cardboard. I pulled it out. It was a thin, high-end paper envelope, the kind used for exclusive event invitations. And inside, 2 cards. The first was a small, personalized menu, embossed with a logo I didn't recognize. It was from a private dining room in a high-end, discreet restaurant in Chicago. The date on the menu, 3 weeks ago, aligned perfectly with Julian's claimed regional check-in trip. It was expensive, the kind of place you only take a single, very important client or a clandestine partner. The second card was a simple, rectangular piece of stiff paper, a reservation confirmation printed from an internal company booking system, not for a hotel, but for a private meeting room at a co-working space in the same Chicago neighborhood as the restaurant. The meeting room name was irrelevant, but the participant listed was chilling. J. Vance for Julian, and R. Vance. No, wait. I looked closer. R. Vance. The second name was S. Vance. Serafina Vance. Julian had booked a private dining experience and then a private meeting room for himself and Serafina Vance. The date was the same as the menu. The time? 2 hours for dinner, followed by 3 hours for the quote-unquote meeting. He had told me they had never met in person. He had told me they lived in another state. Serafina did live in another state, likely near Chicago, which is why he chose that city for his regional trip. He had structured his business travel around their private, physical rendezvous. The distance he cited, she lives in another state, was not a barrier. It was the perfect cloak. The two small cards felt heavier than lead in my hand. He hadn't just continued the mentorship. He hadn't just lied about the nature of the relationship. He had constructed an elaborate, continuous series of physical meetings under the cover of his corporate travel, weaving a tapestry of professional deception that only an HR director, a master of corporate protocol and expense reporting, could execute so flawlessly.
He's an HR director in the corporate world. He knew how to hide his tracks, how to code the expenses, how to write the brief, plausible reports that justified the extra day, the extravagant dinner. My breath hitched in my throat. I didn't cry. Crying was for the old Eleanor, the one who didn't know how to fight. This new one, the investigator, was cold, analytical, and deadly focused. I carefully slipped the cards back into the lining of the briefcase exactly as I had found them. My mind, now stripped of the confusion and anxiety, was racing ahead, calculating the next step. Confrontation now would only lead to a denial, a charming lie, and the immediate destruction of any further evidence. I had the two cards, but I needed more. I needed the smoking gun that would tie the deceit to his current behavior, to his current life. I had to find out why he was maintaining this secret physical relationship. What was the true motive beyond mere emotional or physical infidelity? Was Serafina a mistress? A corporate spy? A key to a business deal Julian couldn't manage without? The Marcus conversation, Serafina is a legacy, suddenly took on a darker meaning. As Julian's footsteps descended the stairs, I was back on the couch, flipping through a magazine, my face a mask of casual relaxation. The silence of the house had returned, but now it felt different. It was the silence before the execution. I looked at Julian when he came back into the room, his ties slightly loosened, his eyes sharp with professional focus. He was the perfect man, attentive, brilliant, outwardly loyal. And he was a lie. A beautiful, expensive, utterly poisonous lie. I would let him go to San Francisco. I would track his movements there. The San Francisco trip was my next target. I needed to see if Serafina followed his movements there, if their monthly rendezvous was truly a constant, calculated variable in his corporate life. I had the evidence of one physical meeting. I needed the pattern. The psychological warfare had shifted. I was no longer struggling with my intuition. I was struggling with the urge to scream. But I remained silent. I smiled. I asked him if he wanted me to pack his travel kit. I was going to play the role of the devoted, oblivious wife until the moment I had enough evidence to bring down the whole structure he had built. Julian had taught me how to compartmentalize. Now I would use his own skill against him. I was ready to step out of the shadow of my past trauma and into the clear, unforgiving light of the present truth.
Julian's departure for San Francisco was a masterclass in domestic normalcy, and I played my role to perfection. I packed his bespoke leather toiletries kit, ensuring his favorite cologne was nestled securely next to the travel-sized razor. I pressed the collar of his crisp white shirt, the one he always wore for the opening day of a major summit, with a meticulous attention to detail that masked the seismic activity inside my skull. "I love you, my angel," he murmured, kissing me goodbye at the front door, his scent of sandalwood and ambition briefly filling the space I now occupied alone. 3 days of absolute corporate chaos. "Don't miss me too much." "Be safe, darling," I replied, my voice smooth, practiced, the casual lilt of the devoted, oblivious wife. "Send me a picture of the Golden Gate if you get a moment." He smiled, a final, easy, perfect smile, and was gone. The minute the black car pulled away, I felt a shift. A cold, hard clarity that drove out the last vestiges of doubt. Julian was gone,
but the investigation was now in full swing. I had prepared meticulously. Julian, in his professional arrogance, often forgot to disable his location sharing feature when traveling, a habit born of convenience and his belief that I would never scrutinize his movements. I had installed a secondary, hidden tracker on his laptop, a relic from a time when I had wanted to share photos more easily, now repurposed for surveillance. My anxiety had been preparing for this moment for years. The first 2 days were a deceptive calm. Julian's movements were textbook. He was at the Fairmont, the location of the summit. The tracker showed him firmly within the conference center walls, punctuated only by brief movements to the hotel restaurant or his suite. He sent me a few anodyne texts about the keynote speaker and the sheer exhaustion of high-level networking. He was exactly where he claimed to be. But the third day, the supposed regional head review day, that was the window. The pre-planned slot Julian used for his private, monthly rendezvous. I watched the map on my secondary phone, the burner I kept hidden in a locked safe, the one Julian knew nothing about. At 9:30 a.m., Julian left the Fairmont. He didn't head to an airport for an early flight home. He didn't check into a regional office. The small blue dot representing Julian's location moved quickly, smoothly, through the city streets. It stopped 15 minutes later, far from the corporate high-rises and the tourist traps. The address was an unassuming, modern structure in a quiet, slightly exclusive neighborhood known for boutique tech startups and private equity firms, the kind of building that advertised discretion, not high traffic. This was a secure, nondescript office complex. The location immediately threw cold water on the idea of a simple romantic tryst. If this were a hotel affair or a cozy, clandestine coffee meeting, Julian, the master of luxury, would have chosen a far more opulent, sensual setting. This was utilitarian. This was professional. This was about work, but the kind of work that demanded absolute secrecy.
The truth of the situation, the corporate conspiracy angle, suddenly felt far more dangerous than the marital betrayal. Infidelity, while devastating, was personal. Corporate espionage or fraud, however, was criminal. It involved massive stakes, reputation destruction, and potential legal jeopardy. Julian wasn't just risking our marriage, he was risking his entire life and dragging Serafina down with him. The anxiety was gone, replaced by a terrible, thrilling sense of resolve. I had to see it. I had to know the true nature of their meeting. The Chicago evidence, the dinner receipt, the meeting room, that proved they met. The San Francisco trip was the proof of the pattern, the why. Within 4 hours, I had booked a last-minute flight to SFO, inventing a quick, plausible lie for Julian should he call. "Oh, darling, Clara and I decided to take a spontaneous girls' trip to Napa. We deserved it." The lie felt hollow, but it bought me time. I packed a small, unmarked bag filled with dark clothing, my investigator phone, and a notebook. I was no longer Eleanor, the anxious wife. I was a detective on a high-stakes case, and the suspect was the man I shared a bed with. Landing in San Francisco felt surreal. The air was cool and foggy, a stark contrast to the brilliant sunshine of our home. I took a rideshare directly to the neighborhood where Julian's dot was stationary. I found a small, independent coffee shop across the street from the discreet office building. It was the perfect vantage point. Quiet, slightly grungy, with large fogged windows that allowed me to observe without being observed. I sat there for 2 hours. The bitterness of the lukewarm coffee was a necessary distraction from the cold dread in my stomach. The building was almost silent. People came and went, but they were mostly young, casually dressed tech workers with their heads in their phones.
No sign of Julian's expensive tailored suit or Serafina's assumed corporate polish. They must have been in a private meeting room deep inside the labyrinth. Then, at 2:47 p.m., they emerged. They walked out together, side by side, Julian looking impeccably sharp, Serafina, just as I had imagined her. Young, ambitious, dressed in smart but unflashy business attire, a dark coat draped over her arm. She was striking, but not in an overtly sexual way. Her beauty was intellectual, sharp, focused. The shock that hit me was not jealousy, but confirmation. They were physical, present, and their interaction was nothing like the sensual drama I half feared. They weren't touching. They weren't smiling. There was no lingering touch, no secret glance. In fact, their body language was intensely professional, almost tense. Julian had his hands clasped behind his back, the posture of a man in control, but his jaw was tight. Serafina looked serious, her brow furrowed in concentration, holding a slim black tablet in her hand. This was not a lover's farewell. This was the conclusion of a high-pressure corporate negotiation.
I watched them walk toward the curb, where Julian's scheduled black car waited. I knew I had seconds. The opportunity to get close, to hear something, anything would vanish. Adrenaline surged. I threw a $20 bill onto the table, grabbed my coat, and slipped out of the coffee shop, melting into the street traffic. I crossed the street diagonally, using a delivery truck as cover, aiming for the public parking garage entrance a few feet from where the car was waiting. As I neared, the sound of the city, the hum of traffic, began to obscure their voices. I risked one step closer, flattening myself behind a concrete pillar. Julian was speaking, his voice low, firm, absolutely critical that the transfer is clean, no paper trail. We cannot afford another... The last word was swallowed by this sudden blast of a car horn. Serafina replied, her voice surprisingly deep and confident. "It's done, Julian. The legacy file is secured. It's too late for Marcus or anyone else to find the vulnerability." The names hit me like shrapnel. The transfer. The legacy file. The vulnerability? Marcus. Marcus Thorne, the former second in command, the one who called Serafina a legacy. Julian wasn't just protecting Serafina from Marcus's potential criticism, he was acting against him, or against the company Marcus still worked for. Julian stepped closer to Serafina, the movement quick and focused, not of romance but of instruction. "And the new position at my firm," he began. Serafina shook her head sharply. "No, it's too soon. I need to be in place at the old firm for the final stage. The visibility there is crucial to the narrative. You know what we agreed. I need to ensure the full value of the acquisition is..." Julian cut her off, placing a hand on her elbow, a brief, hard gesture of control. "Fine, but we maintain the monthly cadence. Everything must look legitimate. That means the video calls when you're not traveling. Our communication protocol is key to the compartmentalization." Our communication protocol is key to the compartmentalization. The words confirmed everything. The monthly video calls were a deliberate, constructed lie, a protocol designed to mislead. They weren't meetings, they were the scheduled alibi. They were part of the legitimate narrative Julian had to maintain. My mind raced, connecting the terrifying dots. Julian, the HR director, knows every vulnerability of his former company. He knows the structure, the personnel, the financial reporting systems. He had left 7 months ago, but his ties were still active, operating through Serafina. Serafina's sudden, fast-tracked promotion was not just a career win, it was strategic positioning. She wasn't his mistress, she was his mole. Julian was orchestrating corporate sabotage, potentially paving the way for a hostile takeover, an acquisition, or leveraging highly sensitive insider information for massive financial gain.
And Serafina, the baby he claimed was too young for him, was his co-conspirator, his brilliant, ruthless partner in a scheme that could ruin him, and by extension, me. Suddenly, Serafina looked past Julian, her gaze sharp, piercing the fog. Her eyes landed directly on the concrete pillar where I was hiding. The sudden recognition in her gaze, the flicker of a predator seeing its prey, was unmistakable. She hadn't seen my face, but she had registered the unusual presence, the stillness of the shadow. "Julian," she whispered, her voice urgent, the professional composure momentarily shattered. She nodded slightly toward my position. Julian didn't turn. He was an HR director, trained in crisis management. He didn't react with panic. He tightened his grip on her arm, a silent command for control.
"Stay composed," he said, his voice dropping to an almost inaudible whisper. "Don't look. Get in the car now. We execute the protocol. Call me from the office, not on the road." Serafina slipped into the back of the car, her movements quick and economical. Julian glanced around, his face now a mask of professional annoyance, scanning the area with the focused precision of a man who knows he is vulnerable. He didn't see me, but I knew he was looking for me. I pulled back, sinking deeper into the shadow of the pillar, my heart hammering a chaotic rhythm that felt deafeningly loud. I could feel the cold concrete against my cheek. I held my breath until the sleek black car pulled away from the curb, carrying my husband, my betrayer, and his brilliant co-conspirator out of sight. The danger was no longer abstract. I had been seen. Serafina had registered a suspicious presence. Julian would ask questions. He would try to find the anomaly. My spontaneous girls' trip to Napa suddenly felt dangerously flimsy. I waited until the street was clear, the silence returning, heavy and accusing. I stumbled back toward the coffee shop, not caring about the $20 bill on the table. I had arrived in San Francisco looking for a simple truth, a confirmation of infidelity. I was leaving with a nightmare. My husband wasn't having a cheap, emotional affair. He was involved in something calculated, premeditated, and almost certainly criminal, using his corporate power to manipulate and steal. His lie about Serafina's partner, the lie about the age difference, the lie about the distance, they were all designed to hide not a love affair, but a partnership in crime. The betrayal trauma was nothing compared to this. The past was about broken hearts. The present was about broken laws. I got back on a plane that evening, flying home, not to Napa, but to the center of the storm. I needed to act fast. Julian would be home tomorrow evening. He would be relaxed, confident, armed with new lies and a perfected narrative. I had evidence of the what, corporate sabotage, and the who, Julian and Serafina. Now I needed to prepare for the final confrontation, the moment I would use his own compartmentalization against him. I needed to find out where the legacy file was secured, and I needed to do it before Julian realized his devoted, oblivious wife was the most dangerous threat to his entire operation. The house, when I returned to it, smelled of Julian. The scent of sandalwood and old leather, once a comforting marker of home, now felt suffocating, the heavy perfume of a lie. I had navigated the airport and the short drive home with the forced composure of an actress in the final critical scene of a play. My spontaneous Napa girls' trip glow was carefully constructed. A few staged photos of vineyards on my phone, a vague account of excessive Pinot Grigio, and a general air of relaxed exhaustion. Julian returned the following evening, exactly as scheduled, his energy levels inhumanly high, His suit pristine, his eyes sharp and assessing. He was testing me. I felt the weight of his scrutiny in every casual touch, every soft question about my trip. "Napa was exactly what you needed, my love," he said, pouring me a glass of that very Cabernet he and I had shared a year ago, the night he told me the lie about Serafina's partner. "You look rested." I was exhausted. The entire summit was a grind. "It sounds it," I replied, letting a genuinely weary sigh escape. "I'm glad you're back. You know how I hate it when you travel." His hand rested on my shoulder, a heavy, possessive weight. "Never doubt that I am always coming back to you, Eleanor. Always." The words were meant to be reassuring, but in the context of what I knew, the Chicago rendezvous, the San Francisco protocol, they sounded like a threat. He wasn't promising loyalty, he was demanding complicity. The psychological warfare of the next 24 hours was the hardest part of the investigation. We were two spies occupying the same territory, each trying to read the other's signal flares. Julian was watching for signs of unease, of suspicion, of an interrupted alibi. I was watching for the slip, the hesitation, the moment he might realize the truth of my San Francisco detour. His confidence was staggering, a testament to his belief in his own untouchability. He truly believed he had constructed the perfect compartmentalized deceit. But I had the words. The legacy file is secured. The vulnerability. My focus narrowed, crystalline and cold. I had to find that file. Where does a man who lives in the digital world hide something he cannot afford to lose? Not a physical safe deposit punks, too slow, too traceable. Not a private drive, he was too much of a professional to risk a physical piece of hardware. The answer, I realized, lay in the culture they both loved to discuss, the culture that was their intellectual bond. Julian had sent Serafina Sapiens, a book about human systems, progress, and revolution. Julian, the HR director, was obsessed with organizational structure. The file wouldn't be hidden, it would be disguised. Hidden in plain sight, deep within a document so boring, so dense, that no one would ever read past the executive summary. I waited until the following afternoon. Julian was back at his current office for a long board meeting, a guaranteed 6-hour window. I went to his walnut and glass fortress, the home office where he had once laughed that genuine, vibrant laugh while talking to Serafina. His corporate laptop was locked. He used a multi-factor authentication, impossible to crack. But Julian, despite his brilliance, had one Achilles heel: his habit of scribbling temporary passwords on sticky notes when dealing with complex, multi-layered security updates. A habit born of corporate exhaustion, not carelessness. I scanned the desk. I checked the back of the monitor, the side of the tower, the corkboard. Nothing. Then I saw it. Tucked inside the hardback cover of the very book Serafina had sent him a year ago, the vague, high-level book about culture, was a small yellow square. I peeled it away, my fingers trembling. A 9-digit code, followed by the initials temp auth. It was a desperation key. My hands flew across the keyboard. The code worked. I was inside Julian's operational center, the hub of his criminal enterprise. The shame of the intrusion was instantly drowned by the sheer necessity of the moment. The files were endless. Expense reports, team reviews, quarterly goals. I searched for keywords. Serafina. R. Legacy. Vulnerability. Acquisition. Nothing. Julian was too smart for such obvious labeling. I changed tactics. I searched for large documents created or modified 7 months ago.
the exact time Julian left the company, and, concurrently, maintained only his relationship with Serafina. I found it. A massive, 300-page document titled Post-Merger Integration, Comprehensive Culture Strategy and Talent Retention Protocol. A perfect disguise. A document so dull, so professional, so utterly Julian, that it was the last thing any forensic analyst would suspect. I opened the file. The first 200 pages were exactly what the title promised. HR jargon, organizational charts, buzzwords about synergy and alignment. But on page 201, the font changed. The language sharpened. It was the legacy file. It detailed a massive, systemic accounting fraud Julian had overseen at the former company, a hidden liability involving misclassified pension funds that, if revealed, would sink the company's valuation. It was the vulnerability. Julian, as HR director, had been perfectly positioned to create and bury the fraud. The document then shifted to a timeline, a detailed, ruthless plan. Julian's resignation was calculated. His move to the boutique firm was to gain access to the financial players necessary for the final stage. Serafina's role was outlined in chilling detail. She was strategically promoted within the former company to a position of budgetary oversight, ensuring the vulnerability remained dormant, unexamined, until Julian's new firm could facilitate a hostile takeover at a catastrophic discount. The profit margin would be astronomical, split between Julian and his shadowy partners. Serafina was his insurance policy, his insider, his legacy of ruin. The realization was a punch to the gut. The intellectual connection, the shared books, the admiration, it wasn't flirting. It was the bonding of two ruthless minds, two professionals united by a shared, massive criminal goal. I spent the next hour working with frantic precision. I compressed the 300-page file, secured it with military-grade encryption, and uploaded it to an anonymous external server. I emailed the key to an old friend, a solicitor I trusted implicitly, with the instruction, "Open this only if you do not hear from me within 72 hours. Deliver to the Financial Crimes Division." I needed an insurance policy of my own. I deleted the original, the temporary authentication sticky note, and returned his office to its immaculate, deceptive order. That evening, the air in our dining room was thick enough to choke on. The stage was set for the final confrontation. Julian was relaxed, sipping his wine, discussing a golf tournament. I watched him, seeing not the handsome, trusted husband, but the architect of a billion-dollar crime, a man who had used me as a shield and our marriage as a convenient camouflage. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I used the language of his world. Direct, precise, and devastating. "Did you have a successful regional head review in San Francisco, Julian?" I asked, my voice flat, almost bored. He smiled, a perfect, practiced curve of the lips. "As successful as they can be. Long days, Eleanor. Long, dull days." Dull? I paused, letting the silence stretch, forcing him to meet my gaze. "I overheard a fragment of conversation the other day, Julian. Someone used a rather interesting term. They mentioned the legacy file and a critical vulnerability. It sounds far from dull, darling. It sounds rather high stakes." The smile froze on his face. The transformation was instant and terrifying. The smooth, charming husband vanished. replaced by the predator, the HR director who had just seen his exit strategy vaporize. "I don't know what nonsense you're talking about, Eleanor," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register, the professional composure snapping. "You've been listening to office gossip. You need to stop letting your anxiety control your life." "My anxiety is gone, Julian," I countered, pushing my untouched wineglass aside. "It turns out my anxiety was merely a symptom. The disease was you. The legacy file, Julian? The misclassified pension funds? The vulnerability you created at the old firm before your clean exit. Serafina Vance, she's not your mistress, she's your accomplice, strategically placed for the final stage of the hostile takeover." He stared at me. He didn't deny it. He couldn't. The surprise was profound. The shock of a master chess player realizing his pawn has suddenly developed the power of the queen. "You were in San Francisco," he whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "The Napa story. It was a lie." "Just a communication protocol," I said, using his own damning phrase. "You taught me how to compartmentalize, Julian. I just applied your methods to our marriage." Julian leaned back slowly, his eyes glittering with a mixture of terror, grudging admiration, and venomous rage. The mask was completely gone. This was the true Julian. Ruthless, calculated, and terrifyingly ambitious. "You have no idea what you've walked into, Eleanor," he said, his voice dangerously low, a coiled threat. "This is not just some corporate restructuring. This is a game with billions. You cannot touch this. You are my wife. You are financially tied to me. Anything you say, you implicate yourself. Who are you going to run to? The authorities? They will see the wife suddenly finding evidence just when the deal is about to close. They will assume you're trying to extort me." He stood up, walking slowly around the table toward me, closing the distance, exerting the kind of physical and psychological power he used in a hostile boardroom negotiation.
Serafina is not some little mentee, Eleanor. She is a viper. She has access to things you cannot fathom. If you try to disrupt this, she and our partners will not just let you walk away. I can protect you if you stay silent. We dissolve the marriage quietly. You get your settlement. You walk away clean. But if you talk... He paused, standing directly over me, his shadow falling across my face. "You will lose everything, including your freedom." I met his gaze, my own eyes hard and unwavering. For the first time since my first betrayal, I felt truly free. The trauma, the anxiety, the fear of being wrong, it was all subsumed by the cold, clear truth. "You taught me a valuable lesson tonight, Julian. You taught me the true meaning of a legacy." I reached into the pocket of my blazer and pulled out a small, encrypted USB drive. I held it up, letting the faint light catch the metal. "I've already secured your legacy, Julian. It's been transferred. The file is clean, and it is safe, where neither you nor Serafina can touch it. If I don't check in with my solicitor by tomorrow morning, the entire 300 pages, the full timeline, the names of your partners, it goes straight to the federal prosecutor's office." He lunged for the drive. I moved faster, throwing the small device across the room, letting it clatter harmlessly against the wall, a distraction. "It's already gone, Julian,"
I said, rising to my feet, placing the table between us. That's just a piece of plastic. The real data is out. Your perfect compartmentalization just cost you everything. The look on his face was pure, unadulterated devastation. The collapse of a lifetime of ambition. He was caught. I didn't wait for his response. I didn't waste time on a dramatic exit. I turned, walked out of the dining room, and went straight to the garage. I grabbed the small hidden bag that I had packed for the Napa trip, and without looking back at the beautiful, toxic house, I got into my car. As I drove away, speeding down the long, manicured driveway and onto the quiet, tree-lined street, I didn't feel the familiar stab of betrayal trauma. I felt a profound, chilling peace. I had faced the ultimate lie, the biggest danger, and I had prevailed. I was not the victim of my past anymore. I was simply the woman who had walked away from a monster. Julian's legacy was ruin. Mine was survival.